Ready to step off the map from the most hidden alleyways to the stories nobody told you? Uncharted Alleyways begins now. Your definitive guide and travel podcast, culture, adventure, and the world as you've never heard it. Tune in, disconnect from the obvious, and come explore with us. Uncharted Alleyways, your next trip starts here.
Have you ever visited a famous city and you get off the plane, you go see all the monuments, you take the exact same photos everyone else takes, and then you fly home, but you leave feeling like you didn't actually, meet the city at all?
Oh, yeah. Completely. You just check the boxes.
Right. You saw the landmarks, but you completely missed the actual pulse of the place. So our mission today is to figure out how to bypass that whole tourist trap. We're doing a deep dive into how to truly understand a place. And we're doing that by looking at some, really fascinating travel notes from an exploration of Glasgow, Scotland, specifically from the travelogue Uncharted Alleyways. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, I mean, it is an incredibly common trap for travelers, right? You get caught up in the checklist of grand sites, the taluses, the famous statues, all of that. But the primary theme that really emerges from these notes is that a city is not defined by its grand monuments at all.
No, not at all.
Right. It's actually defined by how its people live when they aren't trying to impress anyone. It's the everyday reality, the quiet corners, the totally unglamorous morning routines, the local rhythms. That is what tells the true story of a place.
Yeah, the way I think about typical tourism is that it's basically like looking at a city's LinkedIn profile.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right, because it's perfectly curated, all the historical achievements are highlighted, and, it's wearing a suit.
Yeah.
But our approach today, digging into Glasgow through these specific sources, is way more like hanging out in the city's living room in sweatpants.
Yes.
You see the messy reality, the comfort, and the actual personality.
That is a perfect way to frame it. And, to understand that personality, before we even get to the people, we really have to look at the physical space they inhabit, because a city's infrastructure absolutely dictates how its culture flows.
Right, the bones of the city.
Exactly, the foundational hardware. And in Glasgow's case, that hardware was built on massive, just staggering Victorian wealth, and its history as a true British industrial powerhouse.
Yeah, the sources paint this incredibly vivid picture of the River Clyde. If you look at it today, you see modern museums and walkways, but you have to mentally rewind a few decades.
You really do.
It wasn't just a picturesque body of water back then. It was the absolute epicenter of global shipbuilding. I mean, it was a massive, deafening, smoke-filled economic engine.
An engine that drove immense, concentrated wealth into the city during the 19th and early 20th centuries. And that wealth is exactly why Glasgow is packed with these stunning, sometimes really heavily weathered stone facades.
The architecture is wild.
It really is. You walk down the street and you just see grand staircases, intricate carved details on what used to be shipping warehouses, and these enormous Victorian civic buildings scattered everywhere.
They aren't pristine, right?
No, not at all. Some of that stone has industrial soot just baked deep into it, which kind of gives the city this feeling of having lived a really long, hardworking life. And if you want to understand the sheer scale of that maritime history, the travelogue points out the Glen Lee.
Oh, the ship?
Yeah, it's this massive, fully restored, historic sailing ship docked right outside the Riverside Museum, which, by the way, the museum itself is this fantastic, completely free space that houses Glasgow's entire transport history, from locomotives to vintage trams.
But wait, I'm looking at this timeline from the sources, and there's a pretty glaring economic cliff here.
Oh, absolutely.
The notes detail how Glasgow eventually faced this severe industrial decline in the late 20th century. The shipyards vanished, the heavy manufacturing moved overseas, and whole neighborhoods essentially lost their primary source of income overnight.
Yeah, it was devastating.
Right. And we've seen that exact sequence of events in, the American Rust Belt or in parts of northern England, and it usually ends with a hollowed-out ghost town.
Yeah.
So I just don't understand how Glasgow didn't collapse into ruin. How does a city lose its entire industrial identity and survive?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Glasgow didn't try to erase its industrial decline, nor did it have the vast resources to just, bulldoze everything and start over with shiny new glass towers. Instead, it literally built on top of the remnants.
Physically on top of them.
Yeah, it is a masterclass in urban reinvention through adaptive reuse. When the heavy industry left, you suddenly had these massive empty warehouses and factories with incredibly cheap rent. And that economic vacuum naturally attracted artists, musicians, and young entrepreneurs.
Oh, I see.
So instead of tearing down the old industrial spaces, the city just allowed them to be transformed. Those old shipping warehouses became cultural venues, bustling restaurants, unique housing, and creative hubs. So the modern landscape along the waterfront looks completely different now. It's modernized. But the river remains the constant anchor. The city adapted by using its heavy industrial past as the literal foundation for a service and culture economy.
Okay. So it was survival by adaptation. I get that. So if the repurposed buildings and the River Clyde are the hardware of the city, then the neighborhoods are essentially the operating system, right?
Yes, exactly.
They dictate how the city actually runs and processes new people today. And moving from those grand industrial spaces into the actual communities requires a completely different travel strategy. The travelogue is very explicit about this for anyone visiting. It says, do not race.
Definitely do not race.
Pick an area, slow down, and just walk.
Yeah, the strategy of slowing down is crucial because Glasgow actively punishes that manic checklist style of sightseeing. The city is sprawling. Its magic isn't in one centralized, tourist square where you can see everything in an hour.
You don't want to spend your day in a taxi rushing from point A to point B.
No, you want to pick a single neighborhood and just exist in its ecosystem for a few hours.
Let's apply that to the West End first, because the notes suggest this is the ideal place to start a morning.
It really is.
You find a small cafe, you get a coffee, and you just wander. It's described as being full of vintage shops, independent bookstores, and these tiny bakeries. It sounds like the kind of environment where the architecture suddenly shifts from Grand Victorian to, like, leafy, winding bohemian streets.
Yeah, very green, very relaxed.
And you can easily lose half a day just observing the pace of life.
It is very much the intellectual and bohemian center, largely because it's heavily influenced by the presence of Glasgow University. But you contrast that operating system with Merchant City.
Right. Totally different vibe.
Completely different. Historically, this area was rooted in the extreme wealth of Glasgow's 18th century trading merchants, the tobacco lords who built these grid-like orderly streets. During the day, it retains this elegant, somewhat relaxed historical feel.
But at night?
Oh, at night, it completely transforms. Because of how those streets and old merchant squares are laid out, it funnels foot traffic into this incredibly lively hub. Restaurants fill up, music spills out of venues, people gather in the old courtyards. It's where the historical architecture perfectly facilitates the modern, energetic pulse of the city.
And then the notes shift focus to Denniston, over in the east. The author describes this specific neighborhood as a crystal ball for Glasgow's future. But wait, why that specific area? What makes it predictive?
Well, it comes down to the mechanics of urban migration. As areas like the West End became more expensive and established, younger creatives, students, and new families started looking for more affordable space, and they found it in Denniston.
Ah, the classic gentrification cycle, but maybe a bit different.
Right. So Denniston isn't just about having a few trendy businesses. It's about a highly specific demographic mix. You have long-established working-class families living side by side with young professionals and artists.
So it's an incubator.
Exactly. They are collectively supporting a rapidly growing scene of independent cafes, bakeries, and art spaces, but doing so without completely erasing the neighborhood's original identity. It really represents where the everyday culture of the city is heading. It's alive, it's evolving, and it's totally grassroots.
A major element tying all these different neighborhood ecosystems together is the market scene, too. The sources emphasize skipping the factory-produced tourist shops on the main streets entirely.
Skip them all.
Instead, you go to the weekend markets to find street food, original artwork, and handmade crafts. And they specifically highlight looking for Macintosh-inspired design souvenirs. For anyone unfamiliar, we should probably clarify what that means because it seems like it's a huge part of the city's visual identity.
Oh, absolutely. When we talk about Macintosh, we are talking about Charles Rainey Mackintosh. He is essentially Glasgow's answer to Frank Lloyd Wright.
Wow.
Yeah, he was an architect and designer at the turn of the 20th century, famous for these beautiful geometric Art Nouveau designs. Think elegant, elongated, high-backed chairs, stylized rose motifs, and incredible stained glass. His aesthetic is literally baked into the DNA of the city.
So buying a Macintosh-inspired piece from a local artist at a market isn't just buying a trinket. You are taking home a piece of the city's actual artistic lineage rather than, a plastic keychain shipped in from the other side of the world.
Honestly.
And naturally, walking through all these markets and neighborhoods takes energy, which brings us to the fuel that runs the city. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. When I think of traditional Scottish food, my mind immediately defaults to haggis, oats, maybe some hearty root vegetables.
Sure, that's the stereotype.
But the travel notes are explicitly telling me that if I want to eat like a true Glaswegian, I need to be looking for curry and espresso.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes perfect logical sense. Food is arguably the most accurate map of human migration. Remember that massive industrial boom we talked about earlier?
Shipyards on the Clyde, yeah.
Right. Those manufacturing plants didn't just attract money, they acted as a giant magnet for labor. People poured in from all over the world to work, and when they came, they brought their recipes. Those immigrant communities put down roots, opened businesses to serve their own communities, and fundamentally rewired Glasgow's palate.
It's just fascinating that the modern food scene is a direct downstream result of 19th century heavy industry.
It really is. Let's look at the Italian pipeline, for instance. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many Italians who were fleeing poverty migrated to Scotland. They started opening up ice cream parlors, fish and chip shops, and cafes.
Just normal working class spots.
Exactly. They were working-class immigrants serving a working-class Scottish population. Fast forward to today, and Glasgow has a deeply entrenched Italian cafe culture. One of the most authentic experiences you can have is sitting in a traditional, family-run Italian cafe in Glasgow, having a perfectly pulled espresso and a pastry, and just watching the city go by.
And the South Asian influence followed a really similar trajectory, right? The travelogue practically demands that you get a curry for dinner.
Oh, it's a requirement.
The notes say the South Asian community grew massively post-World War II, filling labor shortages in transport and manufacturing, and they opened restaurants that became staples for shift workers. But there's a very specific warning in the notes here.
Yes, pay attention to the warning.
It says, ask your server for their recommendation, but tread carefully. Because the definition of a little spicy in a historically working-class immigrant neighborhood can be exponentially hotter than what you might expect at your local suburban takeout.
It is a very necessary warning. The culinary scene in Glasgow is not watered down for tourists. It is robust, it is highly seasoned, and it is built for the locals. Whether you are at a casual neighborhood spot or, upscale dining in the West End, the key indicator of quality is looking for places packed with people who actually live in the area, not folks holding guidebooks.
We absolutely cannot talk about the local palate without mentioning the hyper-local anomaly the sources highlighted. Urn brew.
Urn brew.
For anyone who hasn't encountered it, this is a ridiculously bright, neon orange, incredibly sweet soft drink. The notes say the flavor is basically impossible to accurately describe, like maybe bubble gum mixed with iron. But trying it is an absolute must, just for the experience. It's practically a rite of passage.
It is deeply embedded in the Scottish psyche. In fact, it is one of the very few local soft drinks in the world that consistently outsells Coca-Cola in its home market.
It outsells Coke.
It does. You might find it far too sweet, but travel is about stepping outside your comfort zone and engaging with the environment on its own terms. Even if that just means drinking a neon orange soda that defies all culinary explanation.
Drinking the neon soda and eating the local food naturally puts you in a position to actually talk to the people sitting next to you, which is great. And the travelogue dives deep into the voice and the soul of the Glaswegian, starting with the language itself. The accent is famous, but it can be a real hurdle.
The Glasgow accent is wonderfully distinct, incredibly fast, and it can be notoriously difficult for visitors to decipher at first. The author of the travel notes gives one absolute non-negotiable rule, though.
Do not pretend to understand if you don't.
Right. Do not fake the nod.
The author points out that faking comprehension isn't polite. It actually comes off as condescending. Glaswegians are completely aware that they speak quickly and use a lot of local slang. The notes suggest the best approach is just to laugh, admit you missed it, and ask them to repeat themselves. It transforms a potential language barrier into an instant icebreaker.
And that icebreaker ties directly into their unique brand of humor, which is the cornerstone of the city's social dynamics. Glasgow humor is incredibly dry, it's sarcastic, it's playful, and it is unflinchingly direct.
The psychological insight in the source material here is brilliant. In a historically tough, working-class industrial city, banter served as a social filter. It was a way to test resilience.
Yes.
So when a Glaswegian makes a sarcastic joke at your expense in a pub, it is not an act of hostility. It's actually a test and an invitation to intimacy. It's a sign they feel comfortable enough to tease you.
Exactly.
If you get defensive, you fail the test and ruin the moment.
Right.
But if you laugh and give it right back to them, you have essentially just made a friend.
And that underlying warmth, that need for communal connection, extends right into their arts culture, too, particularly the music scene. You can't understand Glasgow without understanding its relationship to live music.
The notes highlight the Bearland Ballroom, right?
Yeah, the Barrowland Ballroom is an absolutely legendary venue. It has a famous sprung dance floor and incredible acoustics. But the vital point the author makes is that in Glasgow, music isn't just passive entertainment you consume on a Friday night. It is generational memory.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is community identity. Generations of locals have relied on live music as a form of escapism and bonding in a city that used to be defined by grueling physical labor.
And the music is woven into the fabric of the streets. The sources suggest seeking out acoustic sets, jazz, indie rock, or traditional Scottish music in tiny local venues. You might walk into a small, unassuming pub on a Tuesday with zero expectations and discover a band that completely blows you away.
It happens all the time.
And that accessible culture isn't just indoors either. The street art scene is described as massive and totally integrated. The author talks about the thrill of just turning down a random side street and being confronted with an enormous, stunning mural that transforms a blank brick wall into a masterpiece.
That street art is a direct reaction to the industrial decay we discussed earlier. It is the democratization of art, taking it out of the gated, ticketed museums and putting it on the street for everyone to experience. And, speaking of accessible history, this raises an important question regarding how we interact with the past.
Right, the museum part.
Yeah, the travelogue points us toward the People's Palace in Glasgow Green. Glasgow Green is one of the city's oldest public parks. But the People's Palace inside it is a museum dedicated entirely to the social history of the city.
Not the royalty, not the military generals.
Exactly. It's about the ordinary working-class people. It shows you the cramped tenements they lived in, the communal wash houses they used, how their neighborhoods evolved, and how they survived. Think about typical tourism for a second. How often do we travel thousands of miles, stand in massive lines, and pay exorbitant fees just to see how the top 1% lived centuries ago while completely ignoring the people who actually built the city?
It's a complete inversion of how we are taught to be tourists. Like, a royal palace shows you how power and wealth were maintained. But a social history museum, like the People's Palace, shows you how life was actually lived. If you want to understand the sarcasm, the resilience, and the reinvention of Glasgow, you have to understand the story of the everyday person.
Exactly. That is the connective tissue of everything we've discussed today.
So, we've moved from the heavy industrial hardware of the Clyde through the operating system of the neighborhoods, tasted the global fuel of the food scene, and unpacked the psychology of the people. Let's distill this into some practical magic for anyone listening who wants to travel this way. What are the key operational tips from the notes?
On a purely practical level, the sources advise standard urban common sense, especially after dark. Stick to well-lit, busy streets and reliable transportation. But more importantly, talk to the locals for current advice, because neighborhood dynamics change. An area in the East End that feels vibrant and welcoming on a Saturday afternoon might feel very isolated and different late at night.
Right. And another great logistical tip. Check the calendar. Because Glasgow has such a legendary music and sports scene, it regularly hosts massive international concerts and football matches.
Oh, that is crucial.
If you're a budget traveler looking at hostels or guest houses, prices can spike dramatically on those weekends, so you really need to plan around the events calendar. Also, they mention using Glasgow's geography to your advantage. It functions as an incredible base camp. You can take a slow, scenic day trip out to Loch Lomond or the Scottish Highlands.
It's so close.
The advice is to go out, hike, see the spectacular rugged landscape, but don't exhaust yourself. Come back to the city to spend your evening where the culture is actually happening.
Which perfectly sets up the ultimate piece of advice from the travelogue, which the author calls the local secret. It is the philosophy of the deliberately unplanned evening.
I found this deeply refreshing. The ideal evening, according to the notes, doesn't involve a spreadsheet at all. It looks like this. You take a walk through the West End in the late afternoon, starting near Byers Road. You grab something casual to eat, you walk toward Kelvin Grove Park, and you just follow the river as the sun goes down. And then you let the evening unfold organically.
No rushing.
You don't overschedule. You listen for the sound of live music drifting out of a pub door, and when you hear something you like, you just walk in.
You let the city guide you. You don't need to stay out until 3 a.m. downing pints to prove you had an authentic time. There is no prize for returning to your hotel exhausted. Travel is supposed to be enriching and enjoyable.
Amen to that.
The most memorable moments are almost always the ones that occur in the margins of your itinerary, Walking down a street with absolutely no famous landmarks, just smelling the curry from a local restaurant, hearing a burst of sarcastic laughter from a doorway, watching the rain reflect the streetlights on weathered Victorian stone. That quiet observation is the authentic experience.
So what does this all mean? When we synthesize all these elements, the repurposed shipyards, the Italian cafes, the South Asian spice, the dry humor, the street murals, what is the ultimate takeaway about a place like this?
The ultimate takeaway is that Glasgow is a city completely comfortable in its own skin. It isn't trying to be pristine or perfect because it just doesn't need to be. Its beauty stems entirely from its resilient personality. It is profoundly unpretentious.
Yeah, unpretentious is the perfect word.
It's a place where the heavy, gritty, industrial past and the highly creative, vibrant present don't just coexist, they rely on each other. You might travel to other European capitals for the flawless postcard views, but Glasgow is the city you actually end up talking about at dinner parties for years afterwards, simply because of how it made you feel and the people you met.
It is the city you actually hung out with in sweatpants. And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. We spent this entire deep dive analyzing how to uncover the real Glasgow by looking past the grand monuments, tracing the history of its workers, and finding the everyday life. But I want you to apply that lens to your own life. Think about your own hometown right now, the place you live every day. If a visitor stopped you on the street and asked you to show them the real city, where would you take them? Would you send them to the famous statue downtown? Or would you take them to the corner cafe, the local market, the dive bar with the good band? Are you currently living in the monument version of your city, or are you engaging with the everyday version? Maybe you don't need to fly across the Atlantic to start exploring. Maybe it's time to find your own uncharted alleyways right outside your front door